So for my speech, I chose The Hypocrisy of American Slavery by Frederick Douglass, which was considered to be a very controversial speech. So all of us kind of know a little bit about Frederick Douglass because we've all heard of him in our history classes, but to dig a little more into him, he was born a slave, and on September 3rd, 1838, he finally escaped slavery at the age of 20. It was not his first attempt, but it was thankfully his last. After escaping slavery, he then fled to New York City to start a new life and to experience a new place and to be given all the opportunities that any other man would be given. He turned out to be one of the most influential American abolitionists of his time in the 1800s, and he started the North Star, which is an anti-slavery newspaper which didn't just fight slavery, but it fought other issues that him and similar people were facing at the time. He not only kind of fought slavery through paper and through speeches, he also led the local Underground Railroad. So that was something that he liked to, well, he didn't talk about because he didn't want to kind of give away his cover or anything, but it was something that he was very proud of when he was done. After he was kind of finally got his freedom that he was wanting for many years, he wrote the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, but eventually had to fled to Europe because of all the backlash he was getting and how he was putting himself in danger and was worried that he was going to be re-enslaved. So he fled to Europe to continue his fight. So the reason that the speech was so controversial was people in Rochester, New York, and they were mostly all white people, asked him to talk about freedom on the 4th of July, which he thought was very odd because he was a slave and he still had his family members that were enslaved, and they were asking him to talk about how great his freedom is on a day that represents freedom. So it was given in Corinthian Hall in Rochester, New York, and in the audience was those who were fighting the same freedoms and the white people of the community that had asked him to give a speech, which they were not exactly sure what he was going to talk about. So it was a little controversial for them as well because they thought he would be bringing good news and being like, oh yeah, freedom is super great, but instead he was talking about how hypocritical the United States was. So then I chose a small part of a speech that was just a reenactment because in the 1800s they didn't have anything.
Fellow citizens, pardon me, and allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? Am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light, and my burden easy and delightful. For who is there so called?
Okay, so the significance of the speech then was it brought out, or it pointed out the flaws in society and how the white Americans all kind of, not all, but most of them were like, slavery is okay, but then there was the other half that fought strongly against it, and so he was pointing out his ideas on slavery and segregation and how freedom was not for what the United States would be preaching and how everyone was given the same freedoms. He pointed out how controversial they were. He became one of the most influential African American leaders in the 1800s. And today we are seeing that the African American community has gained many more freedoms, but in recent times we have been seeing some backlash, and that some issues are starting to kind of come up to the surface again, which people are either for or against. So some rhetorical devices that he used in his speech was rhetorical questions. So he used rhetorical questions to get the audience involved and to kind of show them how the U.S. what the U.S. preached wasn't being followed through. So he asked, are the great principles of political freedom and natural justice embodied in the Declaration of Independence extended to us? Kind of showing how, and asking them, like, as an African American, do you have the same freedoms? Can you do the same things as that white male walking down the street? Can you go into the same shop? Can you do the same things as he can? Another rhetorical device that he uses is allusion. He alludes to the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bible because he knows all of these articles or writings are all valued very much by his listeners. And then the next one he uses is symbolism, and he kind of symbolizes chains and says that they are chains of servitude, symbolizing just slavery and how they were used and how usually chains aren't represented as a good thing. So he uses ethos, pathos, and logos in his speech, and so ethos is ethical, and his example, or the example I chose, was to do so would be to make yourself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. And then for pathos, he uses to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, and to burn their flesh. He brings in family to make it emotional for the listeners, to kind of put them in the shoes that he is in and how they would feel if their family was in slavery as his. And then he uses logos. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty, that he is the rightful owner of his body? Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Just kind of stating how wrong slavery is. And then in summary, Frederick Douglass points out how hypocritical the United States is and how African Americans don't have the same rights, and that he continued to fight for equality and bring awareness. Thank you.